This is the Average American Coalition, and this is the At the Chair broadcast. This week, we're going to have a discussion about something that I like to call the things we don't like to talk about, but what we need to talk about. It's a problem that has plagued America since nearly its very beginning, and it's a problem that persists now more than ever. After a relatively 50-year hiatus, it has reared its ugly head once again, thanks to the efforts of a certain 45th so called president. What I'm talking about is racism. It's the subject that everybody says that they want to address, but nobody really wants to address it. So today, we're going to address the roots of racism. It's schizophrenic psychosis. But the first thing that I want to put forth in this conversation is a couple of disqualifiers. The first order of business is that, like they say, for every rule, there's an exception, and for every exception, there's a rule. So, not everybody is going to fall into these categories. They're basically generalized. So, the way that I look at this is if you feel that it's talking about you, then it probably is. Sad to say. Secondly, I want you to know that racism is not just limited to white people or black people. Racism is a problem with every group of individuals. Here's the thing though, racism is a learned behavior, and at the root of racism is psychosis. We are the conditioned response to our environment. I heard a story once, and this is one of those things right now that if you're going to be easily offended, you might want to turn away to a different video, maybe something with unicorns, lollipops, and Care Bears. But if you're strong enough, stay with us. The average American should be able to handle this because God knows we've been through worse. I heard a story once about the South in the 50s, where one day a white father took his white son in a pickup truck and they went into town to the hardware store. While the father was inside the store, the son remained in the truck. Just before the father came out, a black man, a dark-skinned black man, came walking down the street, and the son had never seen that before. He was used to seeing these pale people, but all of a sudden, he sees this dark-skinned black man. And as the father walked out to the store, the father saw the man too. And he gets into the pickup truck, and the son points him out, and he says, "Dad, who is that?" And the father said, "That's a nigger, son." And from that moment on, the son knew dark-skinned black people as niggers. This is how this kind of concept is learned. But today I want to talk to you on the psychological level. You see, everybody, in some form or fashion, everybody has a level of schizophrenia to them. It manifests in different ways. It could be PTSD, it could be ADD, it could be OCD, it could be the whole friggin' alphabet. It's a matter of how much it manifests. It could be a little simple thing. I myself, I love even numbers. That's my OCD. I can't take three cookies. It's got to be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, etc. That's just a little thing that's part of me. Does it hurt everybody? No. It bothers me if I see 3, 5, 7, 9, etc. I like even numbers. I was born on an even number day, thank God. Imagine if I was born on the 7th, how offended I would be at my own birthday. But everybody has a touch of schizophrenia to them. And the schizophrenia brings about different types of psychosis. For example, like I said about the ADD, the attention deficit disorder, ADHD, OCD, PTSD, and it also brings about different levels of such. And the thing is that it has affected different people in different ways. So the first part of this is we have to go back to the very beginning, and we have to look at the nature of the groups that we're talking about in this country right now. And I'm just going to basically focus it to white people and black people because This country, the indigenous people who we refer to as Native Americans or in the gross old vernacular, Indians, they were already here. They were the people that God placed here in the very beginning. They were here before the Anglo-Saxon Brits came. But let's look at the history of Anglo-Saxon Brits. Anglo-Saxon Brits were royalty to the degree that through incest, they had sex with their own family members to, quote, keep the bloodline intact. This is a habit that they learned in the Bible through the biblical times where the Hebrews had incestual sex with their own relatives to, quote, keep the bloodline clean so that because they were God's chosen people, they were not to commingle or intermingle with other people. So they followed that and justified it through the biblical scriptures. And then because they did have wealth and they did have power, they stole a lot of it. They became known as conquerors. They felt themselves to be conquerors. When the Bible says you will be more than conquerors, they applied that to themselves. They did that. The Bible didn't do it. See, this is why people make the mistake of calling the United States a Christian nation. It's not a Christian nation, albeit that some of the laws did come from biblical inspiration. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal. That came from biblical inspiration. That's part of the Ten Commandments. Granted. But there is a separation between church and state. You can't intermix politics with religion. It cannot be done. There's a thin line between morals and ethics, but they still are separate. So let's talk about racism. White people have psychosis based in two things. The first thing is incestual DNA, or from being spoiled as children and having hedonistic lives. Incest causes what we now call autism, which is higher in whites than blacks, if you didn't know. Centuries back in white bloodlines, incest was rampant whether consensually or by rape in an effort to keep the bloodline clean. The closeness of DNA caused genetic misfires, which we now call autism. Usually present are the tics, excessive blinking, twitches, involuntary movements like random sticking out the tongue, etc. I'm sure you've probably seen white people before who blink excessively like this. It's like they can't help themselves. They just constantly blink. Or they flinch. They flinch. Or they might do something like this just out of nowhere. They just start doing it. And then I've seen this one. Out of nowhere, it just happens. This is because in the effort to keep the bloodline clean and to keep being royal and being conquerors, see that DNA, science comes into play. And, for a Christian nation, we don't realize, and mind you, I'm a pastor, but a Christian nation doesn't realize that God created science and scientists and doctors. God gave man that wherewithal so that we could be his eyes and his hands on earth to heal ourselves through him. But that DNA was so close that you became an aberration and an abomination. God did not say for you to make out with your sister or your mama or your first cousin for that matter, because he knew the trouble it was going to cause, but you went with it anyway. Because you were like Abraham. Abraham had sex with his wife's maid because he misunderstood what God said. God said, you shall have a son. He meant it with his wife Sarah, not with her maid. But because Abraham mistook what he said, he went and had sex with the handmaid and messed up God's plan to a certain degree, but that's okay. This is the same thing that happened with Anglo-Saxons and Brits, because the problem is that they felt themselves so superior because they did have material wealth that they had plundered from lesser people, in their opinion, because they had those things, and got fat on the spoils of those things, they justify everything self righteously with the Bible. That's the way that that works. What I'm trying to do here is give you a little bit of where the mindset of racism comes from. I'm trying to give it to you because there is a psychological component. Racism is not inbred. If you want to look at it from the biblical sense, we're the ones that put each other in boxes, right? So we look at men, women, black man, white man, Chinaman, as the old joke used to say, right? Uh, uh, Human beings, animals, plants. But you know what? God, who sits high and looks low, says, my creations. In his book, we're all the same. The reason that we look different is because of the places on earth where he put us and our physical changes to meet with the conditions of where we were living on the planet that he placed us on. That's some deep stuff for you, right? You got to think about that for a minute. Spoiled hedonistic whites bring two sides to the coin. One is where there is generational wealth. The father has set enough wealth to indulge the child's wants, no matter the size or if it's right or wrong. It's okay, Billy. You don't have to go to school. It's all right. We'll homeschool you. Yeah, sure. Right. This is the mindset. This is hedonism. They're never taught whether something is right or wrong. Plain and simple. They're not taught these things. A good example of what I'm talking about are the Trump boys. Two of them in particular. We're going to be talking about Fred Jr. and Donald. Now, the first order of business is to understand that Fred Trump and his father, okay, number one, they had a lot of money that they acquired through criminal means, essentially. Fred Trump was an immigrant. Yes, I said it. He was an immigrant from Germany who came here, went to Alaska first, and started pillaging over there by not only opening up hotels, but he opened up whorehouses. And that great wealth he passed on to his son Fred, who was Donald's father. And Fred, to keep that money going, he already had that generational wealth to start with. So he was basically born with a silver spoon in his mouth. Fred didn't have to work a day in his life. All Fred had to do was conjure up devilish schemes. Okay? All he had to do was sit back and make the decisions that would basically screw the average man. And he passed those things down to his beloved son, Donald. Fred Jr., on the other hand, wasn't that type of fella. He was, not everybody is geared toward in this learned behavior of evil. Not everybody is geared toward that. Donald was. Fred was not. The other side of this coin, too, is that when money is the driving force of your life, you have a tendency to claim that you're just supporting your family. You're doing the right thing by just supporting your family, by taking care of your home. It's okay if the contractors come and they do their work and they spent out of their pocket. It's okay that I don't pay them because I took care of my house first. That's the kind of thinking that a guy like Fred Trump Sr. has, where he feels that it's okay to do this kind of stuff as long as he reaped benefits for his wife and his kids and his house, and he got what he felt that he was entitled to, which he learned from his father, to have the best of clothes and the best of cars and to live in the house on the hill. But some people, like Fred Trump Jr., don't adopt that mindset. It's just not in them. They're good people. There are many good people out there. It's just that somewhere along the way they got tainted. Now, the other thing is that a guy like that that's so well focused doesn't know how to show love. He won't show love. But what he did with Donald, he saw a chip off the old block. He saw a guy just like him that was willing to go the extra round of evil to do what he wanted to do. So what he would do is he would give Donald favor. Now Donald was given all the favor because he had, I'm sorry, Donald was given all he wanted, and because he had some favor, not love, favor, he was given everything. Never really learned to earn anything, and that he could have or do done, he could have or do or say whatever he wants, as long as he could buy his way out of accountability. Fred, however, because he didn't have that killer instinct as Donald did, didn't earn that favor and was yet still lacking in that love. Neither one of them got love from their father. But see, at least Donald had favor because Fred Sr. saw that he was a chip off the old block and he molded him and shaped him in his image, which these guys that have great wealth and money, power and so forth, they feel that they're so right because they have these things to mold their children in their image, is like as if it's God's great gift and blessing that they bestow upon them. But Fred Jr. didn't have that. Fred Howard, however, did not have that favor, and his father's scorn drove him to alcoholism and an early death. You see, Donald was taught just the way his father was and his grandfather was. Donald was taught, you've got wealth and power, son. You can do what you want, say what you want, have what you want. You can go out and rape the neighbor's daughter. It doesn't matter. You can go out and not pay the villagers for the work that they do for them. Doesn't matter, because you know what? You got so much wealth that if one of them dares to make noise about it, all you have to do is take them to court. Just hire an attorney, take them to court, and you have so much money that you'll win the fight. And that's just what happened to Donald Trump. Do you not know that the standard order of business with Donald Trump is he takes out billions of dollars? Donald Trump has no real money. Donald Trump has, he borrows his wealth. In so many words, he borrows his wealth. And in the process of borrowing wealth, what he does, borrowing all this money, is what keeps him in the terms of keeping this so-called wealth. He's living on borrowed money. Now, when the banks call him out and they want to be repaid, here's what happens. He takes them to court and he winds up settling for pennies on the dollar. He'll borrow $6 million, take them to court and wind up paying maybe $400,000 in the settlement. He'll swear that he lost money, which he probably really did anyway. But that's the kind of person that we're dealing with. And he's never held to any real accountability. He thinks he can get away with everything. And why? Because his father taught him that. Because his father did it. Why? Because his grandfather taught him that, which they got away with it too. This is how a psychosis is made. Additionally, whites who have daddy issues are more prone to self-blame and suicide. If they were spoiled babies who did not earn favor, they tend to lash out via self-blame for the smallest things at exaggerated levels, will tend to be loners and outcasts because daddy didn't make them feel worthy enough, and either go towards mass murder, suicide, or both. Look, for example, at the Columbine killers. Look, for example, at the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooter. Poor little babies who were kept in such a little bubble of privilege. I've always believed that probably the kids saw these weird little suckers sitting outside their house and taunted this kid. And he said, not realizing he's 21 years old, 20 years old, he's virtually a man. And little kids taunted him, and he figures he'd get even by going into his mother's gun safe and stealing some weapons and go there and blow them all to hell. And then when the reality of a situation comes in, oh my God, I can't go to jail for the rest of my life. Click, boom. Psychosis. But it's a psychosis that comes from privilege because they think they can get away with it because they were spoiled and they thought that they could get away with it and they were taught that actions don't have an accounting and consequences, and this is what happens. Have you ever noticed how many mass murderers commit suicide? Hmm. They go out and kill 100, 200, 300 people, and when they're surrounded by the cops, and they finally realize that, hey, I'm about to get taken down and face American justice and more than likely go to the prison for the rest of my natural life, they can't stand it. They can't stand the idea that there's going to be a lifer named Bubba who stands 6'7" and likes sex and hasn't had any with a woman for about 15 years, and he gets all the new fish in prison that's going to be waiting on them, and they can't take it, and they turn the weapon on themselves and blow their own heads off because they can't face the truth, because they've never been taught accountability. They've been taught privilege. They've been taught hedonism. But now, on the other hand, black people's psychosis and psychotic behavior is a more of a derivative of a deep-seated generational PTSD. From the kidnapping, excuse me, from the kidnapping and radical lifestyle change of slavery to nearly 5 centuries of unrelenting systemic oppression, added with some prodding by slave masters to turn on their fellow man, blacks have borne a traumatic stress unique to the world. However, it was never manifested to the spoiled baby level of psychosis exhibited by mass murderers like the Columbine or Sandy Hook elementary school shooters. The result normally is self-inflicted by way of drugs and alcohol addiction. They're used as a form of escapism from the aforesaid unrelenting systemic oppression. Or it's turned black on black crime as the product of prodding by white slavers to believe they will be rewarded if they turn on their fellow man. See, here's where it comes from. Now, on the one side of the coin, with white folks, it's come from two things. It's come from incestual sex, where the DNA is too close and autism takes on and the whole mindset is blown to bits. And then the other side of the coin comes from privilege and hedonism and a lack of training in simple morals and accountability and responsibility. This is why they're all messed up. Black folks, on the other hand, let me make this clear to you, and white folks, I hope you listen to this. This is very important. You see, when your Anglo-Saxon relatives first came to this country, and no, it was not Christopher Columbus. Didn't you ever wonder why this country was never named Columbia? It's named America. It's named America after a man named Amerigo Vespucci, who found this country and mapped it. He was the first one. But it was the Anglo-Saxons that came later, that came and settled here. And what they tried to do, because they were used to a life of hedonistic pleasures and they weren't really into hard work. So what they thought they were going to do was they were going to enslave the indigenous people of this land, aka Indians. But that didn't work out very well, did it? Especially when people like the mighty Sioux Nation rose up and said it's not going to happen, and they started scalping folks. Remember? So here's what you did. You set sail for Africa, that big old continent over there, because you knew that those were docile people. See, Africans in Africa, the original black men, the only thing they had to fight off was pythons and pumas. They didn't fight each other. They worked with each other to build their villages. Didn't matter where you came from. They worked with each other. They built villages. They built a culture. They lived in peace. It wasn't until black folks were kidnapped and brought to this country that things changed. And then the unmitigated gall to make them second class citizens after they were beaten and tortured and raped and pillaged and taught to hate each other. And here's a little something else for you in case you didn't realize it. Lincoln didn't free the slaves because he loved black people. Lincoln freed the slaves because he needed to reunite the country because the South was seceding from the Union. Then they needed to be one country and strong in order for the plan to succeed. But see, here's what it all comes down to. Between those accumulated psychosis, and yes, you do have black racists right now. You have black racists. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was what you call a black supremacist. And I agree with him to a certain degree because you know what? At least he was teaching black folks, if you don't love yourself first, you can't love anything. So he was teaching the self-love that the white slavers had taken away from black people. This is your systemic racism. This is the conversation that you need to have, but you haven't been having because you're too scared to have it. This is that conversation. Yeah, we all got psychosis. We're all imperfect. We're all schizophrenic to a certain degree. And through our different upbringings, we have learned different things. We are products of the society and the surroundings that we come up in. And yeah, unfortunately, that Anglo-Saxons have been taught that they are superior. But never forget that it was black backs that built this country. While you were dipping snuff and having parties, and your wives were in front of mirrors and prancing about, it was those black mammies that were raising your babies, cooking for them, cleaning them, feeding them. And it was the black men that built your wealth. Never forget that. But you have the gall to look down on these people. The unmitigated gall. And here's the punchline. When Lincoln did sign that Emancipation Proclamation, and black folks were freed from slavery, all that meant was that you couldn't buy or sell a black man as you would a horse, a dog, a chair, or a table. But you didn't put an infrastructure in place where there was a reparation involved. You didn't put an infrastructure in place where a black man had an equal seat at the table. You didn't give him voting rights. You barely gave him the right to own the clothes he had on his body. He still had to ride the back of the bus for decades. Come on. It's time to have this conversation. Because this is the 21st century. And I'm sorry to tell you, Anglo-Saxons, white nationalists, neo-Nazis, I'm sorry to tell you the truth, but here it is. Black folks and people of color aren't going anywhere. Donald Trump could lie to you, as he always does, till his teeth falls out of his head and the last Diet Coke he drinks comes splattering out of his nose. Black folks and people of color aren't going anywhere. They're here to stay. You know, it's so bad that when this country was young, I remember when the other immigrants came here, the Irish and the Italians and the Jews, and how you ridiculed them because they were different from you. But now you're together because here come these people of color who look totally different from you. But yet they built everything around you and done nothing but make you wealthy. It's disgusting, sad, and pitiful. This is the 21st century. If you want to keep this earth running, you better learn to work together. It's that time. And we're about to start talking about how Republicans are fueling this downfall in race relations, how they're fueling racial intolerance. The average American has learned recently of somebody who has been connected with the government in it and around it for about the last 40 years. And they have agreed to come on this broadcast in the form of a recorded message that we're going to share with you very soon. So be ready for that. Don't miss it, because it's probably going to change your life. We're not talking about somebody who's just sitting home in front of a computer looking at Facebook and coming up with wild theories that make no sense. QAnon, okay? Really? Stuff like Democrats are running a pedophile ring out of pizza parlors, and they drink blood at night. That's the stuff of comic books. What we're going to bring you is somebody who was a government insider. We're going to black out their face. We're going to change their voice because they cannot risk being identified. It could be trouble for them. It could be trouble for everybody. And that's usually what happens when the truth is out, when there's something that's so important to be talked about that they don't want it getting out there. But I have talked to this contact, and I'm here to tell you right now that this person knows that there's a big game that's been going on for quite some time. A really big game that has been meant to bring back the good old days of Victorian England and consolidate power for a certain group. It's been designed to bring back serfdom and fiefdom at the expense of the majority of people. Did you ever stop to realize that the average American is not a wealthy person? They're basically a middle class person. The average American, the 99%, will never earn $1 million in their lifetime. That's the majority of us. We are the voice of America. And the average American coalition is here to let that voice be heard. We are the voice of the vulnerable. The voice of those that the wealthy would just like to sweep under the rug. So please, by all means, subscribe to our channel, hit that notifications bell, share, like, and above all, if you're interested in what you were hearing, the content of this broadcast at the chair, by all means, comment. We'd love to know what you're thinking. You probably won't like me after today because the truth hurts. And we don't like to hear the truth. But the truth is the truth. It can't be changed. And next week, we're going to find out even more about the truth. Until we see each other again, this is the Average American Coalition and the At the Chair broadcast. Signing off. Let's be careful out there.